Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. I'm Alicia Cielle Heiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the history of tarot. For those of you who don't know, Lori, in addition to being an amazing astrologer, is also a tarot reader, and she's been doing a lot of really deep dive research, Aquarius, digging
Always.
about the history of the tarot and how it's evolved. And she's teaching a live class about it right now where she's been putting together a lot of work. And so we wanted to share some of her findings here in the podcast for you guys to learn about.
Yeah, this has become something of a hyperfixation. Um, so in January, we spent 2.5 weeks in Italy or a little over 2 weeks, I think. And we just like ended up on this really crazy rabbit hole, which showed me a whole world of the history of tarot. And I always knew it had a really complicated, really in-depth, really cool history, and I had always really studied and I've taught tarot for years, like 5 years, 4 or 5 years maybe. Um, and typically I go with the Rider-Waite style, and I have taught the symbolism, the numerology, the astrology, the color theory, like all of the different aspects that you need to know to understand the traditional Rider-Waite deck. This one that everyone is typically familiar with when you hear or see tarot. But when we were in Italy, we ended up meeting up with this man named Marco who collects old decks and refurbishes them. He finishes them up. Um, he handprints all of them and he sells them. And we actually ended up buying a bunch of decks from him, and they're gorgeous. Like the boxes are all totally insane. They look like books. And they're just like all these really cool ancient decks that we got from him. Here's another one, also looks like a book. Um, and this one is like hand printed and folded up. Like they just took so much time and effort, and they were so beautiful. And while we were in Italy, I ended up buying like 11 or 12 tarot decks. And back when I was in Paris a couple years ago now, I bought my first Marseille deck. And so I really started to dive into a little bit more of like the Marseille style. And this kind of just sent me down a path of like wanting to learn more, wanting to know more. And I've been teaching a lot of classes in person at my shop about tarot, about astrology, just all of these other things. And I started digging up all of these books and resources and started reading a ton about the history of where tarot actually came from, because I found myself just wanting to know everything. Because Aquarius stellium can't casually like things, must know every detail about where things came from and why. And so I started teaching this course on the history of where it came from, but also an evolution of each card, each of the major cards throughout history, throughout time, and a deep dive into how each card has really shifted and morphed and changed. And I am working on currently trying to re-record these videos and like put out an actual course. which will be available on my website soon. Hopefully by the time we put this out.
Yeah, because we're recording this episode in May of 2025, and we won't be releasing this episode till this summer. So hopefully that will
Yeah,
be
hopefully it'll be done.
ready and live. Check the show notes of this episode when it is available. We'll go ahead and put a link down there so you guys can go and find that course if you want to dig deeper.
Yeah, but it's definitely been such a fun rabbit hole to go down. So today we might do this in a couple episodes. Today we're going to talk about the history, a little bit of like where it came from, and yeah, from there we'll see what happens. Um so tarot originated somewhere in Milan or Florence, but they're not actually sure where it came from. So a lot of its actual history is very morphed or lost or very unknown, and very not agreed upon. But two decks particularly seemed to have been found in a castle in Milan, which was owned by the Visconti family, but it's now a really big museum that has nothing to do with tarot anymore. In fact, all tarot anything has been like completely wiped from this museum, which I think is really interesting. It's a lot of like Christian artwork and stuff. Um, but the two decks that were found there were from the 1400s. They're not sure which is older. They're not sure if these were the first two decks ever. But these are the first two decks that survived. And the first one is the Visconti deck itself. So this deck, we actually also bought this in Italy. Um, this was a hand-painted deck made for the family that lived there, the famous family. And this was actually a pretty common thing at this point for families to hire an artist to come in and paint their family into the cards so that when they played the game of Tarocchi, they had themselves to play with. Like they were the characters in the card. So you can actually go through the cards and see, like, there's grandma, like, here's mom. Here's dad, here's grandpa, like the main family members. And that's actually something I really researched too, is like especially with the high priestess and the Hierophant and the emperor and the empress, like those first cards are just family members who were like highly known and respected. And so I did a bunch of research on like who they actually are too, which we talk about with each card, which is really interesting. Because this deck set what ended up becoming the norm of what tarot is today. He also basically started a trend where people would also hire painters to come and commission their own deck so that they had one to play with. Um, the second deck was the Solabusca, which is a very weird, very confusing. Everything about this deck is strange. Um, there's five women in this deck total. It's the four queens and the four of pentacles. Um, very, very, very weird deck. But this deck was actually used when the Rider-Waite deck was created as inspiration. And this is the only deck that had the minors um, animated or drawn before Rider-Waite, before the Golden Dawn took it over, the occultists. So that's another interesting thing too, is typically the cards would have something called pip cards. So they would look like this. It would just have images of the suit rather than anything else, rather than the images that we are familiar with the Rider-Waite deck today.
Can you hold the cards up for like a few seconds longer each time? I feel like it's
Yeah,
nice to
yeah,
be able to really look at them.
absolutely. Yeah, so
And that also is just like so interesting to me because like I just read tarot personally.
mhm.
Um And to me, the power of tarot is the images and what they invoke in your subconscious and how you respond to different images differently at different points. Or, like, if me and
Yeah.
Lori each pull the same card, depending on what's going on in our lives and just what our lived experiences are already, we're going to see different components of those cards. And, like, once we get to like talking about the Rider Waite and stuff, the way that they've intentionally put so many different images in to trigger
Yes.
different associations, like the pip cards don't really give you that. If you're like, what does the
Yeah.
Eight of Pentacles mean?
Right.
And I've definitely seen tarot decks out there that still have that pip card type style. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, as someone who learned how to read from the Rider Waite, I'm like, how do you, like, I feel like
Yeah.
you would just need a little booklet to tell you what it means. And it's just
I
very different.
It's so different. I felt the same exact way until I started to understand a little bit more of, they do readings differently with Marseille style decks. And everything about it is different. And so with those cards, what they typically do is they just really heavily rely on numerology and
Mm-hmm.
the element. So it's like
Okay.
fours mean rest and reflection, pentacles mean money, or cups mean emotions. So it's like a
Okay.
rest from your emotion. Like they keep it very simplified.
Okay.
Um yeah, but it is it's confusing and weird, but the Marseille style decks are actually way more popular still in Europe today.
Hmm.
Like it's actually more of an American thing to use the Rider Waite or Rider Waite style decks. Everything over there is basically created based off of
Okay.
the Marseille style. So
Well,
they
because
don't
the
really have them.
the Rider Waites were Americans, right?
They
Or were they
were from
British?
London. They were
Okay.
British.
Okay.
But it ended up in America
English
like
connection.
very quickly. Exactly. Um,
That is interesting though. And
yeah.
if any of our listeners are in Europe and just like
Yeah.
read Marseille decks or have experience just being connected more to that, please let us know more about your experience
Yeah.
with that because that's just very
It's
interesting to me.
it was so interesting. We met this girl who did like a little tarot tour and brought us to a couple places and did a reading for us. And she was so cute. She was our age, Aries moon, Libra. And yeah, we ended up in a really long conversation about it because she reads Marseille style. And the reading was just so different than anything I would have ever thought to do here. She like separated the suits and like had us pick one card from each suit and one major card to represent us. And it just was read so differently than how I read the Rider Waite. Um, so I just thought that was like it was really cool to see such a like striking difference between cultures because I wasn't expecting that at all.
Hey everyone, we are so excited to announce that we will be teaching two upcoming workshops. One all about the moon phases on September 9th, 2025 at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, that will be recorded and made available for folks to review back to or to listen to if they're unable to attend live. But the moon phases are such an incredible way to learn more about your personality and your emotional and physical needs. They're one of the most potent tools for really understanding yourself within a birth chart. And so we'll be going through all 8 phases of the moon and what it means for whatever moon phase you were born under in the sky, as well as different ritual, magical, and herbal ways to connect with the shifting moon phases in the sky each month. And then we're also teaching a workshop on the secondary progressed moon phases on September 23, 2025 at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And that is an incredible technique for helping you situate yourself within a 28-29 year cycle of growth and decline within your life, and just will help you learn more about how to work with secondary progressions in general, but especially what is your progressed moon phase, which is just so potent for your shifting and modulating needs and personality as you move through life. And so if you're interested in signing up, you can email Lori at lori.kaufman27@gmail.com. Each workshop is $35 individually or $60 if you sign up for both. And we are really excited that we
Yeah.
are starting to offer these workshops. We'll be offering more workshops in the future. So let
Yes.
us know if there's any particular workshop that you would like to see us offering.
Yeah,
Um,
and of course, feel free to message our Instagram anytime if you have any
yeah,
questions, if there's anything you want to see from us, an episode or a workshop or anything you want to dive deeper into. Yeah, we're super excited to start offering this kind of stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And we really hope to see some of you guys there.
So we bought this is a Solabusca deck as well, but it's actually printed on old recycled leather. Um, so this was another really cool one, that we got in Italy too. My whole collection right next to me. Um, so yeah, these two decks were, I guess, found in this main castle, the Visconti family. And this became really trendy. And you also have to remember too, like at this time, it was all created to be a game. So they didn't have images on the minor cards because it was a game. It was a deck of cards. And yeah, I mean we could do a whole episode on the rules of the game. I can talk forever on all of this stuff, but it was very interesting to see how it has changed. Um, the biggest thing is basically that the invention of the printing press is what changed tarot. And that's something that like really sent me down a crazy rabbit hole because I was like, wow, like something like the printing press is what changed it. But that was the first time they were able to make tarot something that was more archetypal and less about your family, right? Where before the printing press, like it was literally individual families would have a deck only because they hired somebody to make it. And so poor families weren't able to have a deck because they weren't able to hire somebody to do it for them. So the Marseille deck was actually the first deck on the printing press. So Marseille is what actually turned the tarot into archetypes instead of it being like grandma and grandpa. Um, which is another thing that I just like thought was super, super cool and super interesting. Um, yeah, so they really don't know like just how old, especially the Solabusca. That one is such a mystery and such a confusing deck because like it's so different. It's so weird. I'm actually reading a book on somebody's thesis of the Solabusca now. It's a really dense book. And it's like really diving into a lot of like ancient astrology practices too. But it is really cool to see like there's so many very specific people in this deck. And Athena is actually, there's literally a card, one of the queens is named Pallas, and it's Athena.
Mm.
Um, and there's like six cards that have something to do with Alexander the Great's story and all the characters in that. So it's just like they're not totally sure why or where it came from or like who
Well,
created this.
and am I correct in assuming that tarot was part of the occult sciences and was like just more hidden in its practice in a lot of ways too, where then the
The
documentation might not be as available?
the occults weren't a thing until the 1800s.
But I guess like so occultism being its own specific lineage, but the idea
Hmm.
that there are just occult practices that are more like
Sure.
hidden magical, like especially with the
Yeah.
presence of the Catholic Church making like the alchemists had to hide a lot of their stuff.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
Newton
correct.
was a really active alchemist, right? And
Hmm.
so sometimes we do have good documentation of these more occult practices, depending on who was, putting it out. But a lot of times it's
Correct.
like more, hidden under like dual meanings and stuff, just because the people practicing
Yeah.
this would have had to protect themselves.
Right. And I um I don't want to say too much about this because I haven't gotten there yet in this book, so I don't want to like butcher anything, but there were the group called the Mithras, um, in ancient Greece, and they were around in like the early like thousands of years ago. Um, but there's a couple of theories that they might have had something to do with the Solabusca, but the timing is like hundreds of years before this deck was even found. So they're not sure like if it could possibly be related, but it also like might be because he found enough connections that like it does seem to match up with a lot of their ancient practices and maybe like it just got lost for many, many years and then it was just randomly found, or like maybe the Visconti family collected it or had it for some reason. Like, we're not totally sure, but that is where it was found. But it's gruesome. Like, this whole deck has just some crazy, crazy imagery. And actually, the Three of Swords in the current deck came from this deck too. So there are some images that actually like survived today from that. I actually pulled that card today. I was like, where's that going to show up? Maybe that's where. Um, yeah, so very interesting. It's the first deck that has 78 cards that really survived. So it really must have had something to do with the current structure that we see today. Um, but yeah, it's very weird deck. It's so gruesome.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and so then in the 1800s, that was when the Golden Dawn was created, and a bunch of occultists came together in London, um, and they started to notice certain things matching up. And so this is actually when astrology got involved with tarot.
Mm.
And basically, like, we might do a whole episode on this too. But long story short, just to sum it up for the history, um, there was one guy who noticed, hey, there's 22 Hebrew letters, and each Hebrew letter has an association with a sign and a planet. And if we take the Hebrew letters and, it's matching with Kabbalah, and we align the order of the tarot, starting with the magician being card one, and started to align each of the cards with a Hebrew letter, giving it then a planet and giving it an association, then we can start to like filter in some extra meaning and some extra
Mm.
symbolism. And that's when like astrology got involved. That's when the symbolism became what it is. And then Waite hired Smith in the early 1900s, and they created their deck, the Rider-Waite-Smith that deck that we know today. And their deck was the first time that the minors were created, and they were based off of the deacons in astrology.
Mm-hmm.
So each of the minor cards has a decan um, that it associates with, and so they kept the astrological meanings as well. And then the major cards, Waite actually shifted the Hebrew letter one so that the full card was card one and basically shifted them all one. And the occultists were actually the ones who changed two of the cards too. So if you've ever looked at an old deck or a Marseille style deck, you might notice that strength and justice are switched. Justice is card 8 and strength is card 11. But when they started putting astrological meanings to them, Waite was like, this doesn't make any sense. And so he thought that strength made more sense to go with Leo in the astrological order, and justice made more sense to be with Libra.
Mm.
But there's also some cards that just don't quite match up, like the Chariot being matched with Cancer. Like, is a little bit of a stretch because it's such a Mars-like card.
Hmm.
And
I always think of that as like the moon as a traveler
for
and then
sure,
chariot traveling. But yeah,
correct.
I can also see where
Yeah.
you're like,
Well, and the
um,
crab like carries its home on its back and like, it's
hmm.
a stretch, but you can
Can,
get
yeah.
there.
Also, Virgo and the Hermit to me feels difficult to
Yes.
connect.
Yes, because the hermit was actually called the old man in history, and it was associated with Saturn. And like
Hmm.
all
That
of the
makes a lot more sense,
cards.
especially with Saturn rejoicing in the 12th.
Yes, 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 yes. And it actually used to look like this.
Mm, yeah, like that. That's like me and my Saturn return, getting knee
Uh-huh.
surgery and
Yeah,
then like hobbling around on crutches. And I'm like, oh, I have a very embodied understanding of how Saturn
of
feels
Saturn.
now.
Yeah. Well, Saturn was considered the lame god, and he was almost always
Mm,
drawn with crutches or a gash on his leg or something like that. And so, like, sometimes in certain old decks, he was even called Kronos. Like, they saw him as an old man who, like, had gained the knowledge and wisdom from a long life, but also was falling apart because of the old life, like because
hmm
of his like experience he's gained. So it's like the card used to indicate the pros and cons of seeing both ways. It was like,
hmm
yes, you gain the knowledge from living, but you also like, your body's falling apart because you
Yeah.
lived. Um, and so yeah, that's a card that very much changed. Temperance being paired with Sagittarius is another one that felt really weird. The original Temperance cards were actually a woman pouring water into wine to water it down so that it was drinkable because so much wine was like created so strong back then that it was just
hmm
undrinkable.
Well, and we also just learned that in ancient, like when we went to
Yeah,
Greece, is that was
exactly.
the civilized thing to do, was to water your
Hmm.
wine down. And when we went to this ancient site next to the Acropolis, there were all
Hmm.
of these ruins of this like famous mythic battle where the centaurs come to this big feast, and the centaurs were considered much more wild because they're half animal, they're half beast, right? And the
Exactly.
centaurs, like in this myth and in this story, get very, very drunk because they don't water down their wine, and then
Yep.
they end up like attacking the woman and attacking each other, and there's this whole battle, and then the men beat the centaurs, which can also be like mythically understood as like, mind over matter, and like our male or my our human impulses like
Yeah.
controlling and beating are more like bestial animal impulses. But there's a lot of
Yeah.
um yeah, like ancient cultural associations of being civilized by watering down your
Yeah.
wine.
Well, and Sagittarius originally, when the occultist first made the pairings, was matched with the devil card because it was excess. It was what
Hmm.
happens if you have too much Jupiter, right? If you have too much of a good thing, then it becomes the devil, it becomes an addiction. Whereas Temperance has always been a card of patience and moderation and like quite literally watering down the wine so that you can drink it.
Although
Um,
I will say, as someone personally who like my Mars and Jupiter are both in Sagittarius, and then I have a ton of
yeah.
Scorpio, so like my
Yeah,
Mars
yeah.
is very, and a ton of Pisces. So both of those planets are then in charge of planets, and it like all just comes back to my Sag. Like the idea of temperance being associated with Sag to me is very comforting
Mhm.
because Sag can tend towards that excess, and it's a good reminder of if you take that
Absolutely.
like exuberance and abundance of Sag and then you temper it, like there's
Hmm.
literal magic. There's alchemy that can happen there. And I think it's interesting with Jupiter ruling a water sign and a fire sign, and then temperance usually has images of like
Yeah.
mixing the water and the fire. So I
Yeah.
have made that association make a lot of sense to me, but I can agree with
Yeah.
you
Oh,
where
yeah.
I probably had to do some mental gymnastics to get there initially
Right.
because
Right.
Sagittarius is the least, you think about
Right.
Christmas
Temperate.
season
Yeah.
and it's just excess. Like you're not tempering
Yeah.
anything during Sag season.
For sure. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I think there's arguments for why all of them could make sense.
Hmm.
For sure. But also like the
Well,
astrological symbolism was kind of just like added later and almost like made up like 100 years
yeah.
ago. It's
And just
very
like
new still.
a couple people who decided this, right? And so
Right.
it's like that doesn't
Exactly.
mean that because that is just a good question always with all of these practices as well.
Yes.
Where did this come from? What was their
Right.
motivation with doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because another card I'm thinking of is like the Hierophant and Taurus to me. Like
It
Taurus
was
is,
originally Aries.
yeah, or I could see it as
Yeah.
Aquarius, honestly. Like you're always
Yes.
pulling the Hierophant, but I'm like Taurus is too leisurely to be the like official Hierophant figure.
Yeah. So the Hierophant is also another one that went through such a crazy, striking journey. Actually, one of my all-time favorites is that the Hierophant actually changed into a couple different things throughout history. And there was a period of time where Christianity actually decided that they didn't want the Pope and the Popess, their original names,
Hmm.
to be in tarot because it was sacrilege, especially to have a devil card too. And like it just, they really didn't like it. And so they, there was a period of time through history where they kept having to replace it with other cards, with other entities. And my all-time favorite was Jupiter and Juno, which was a trend for a little while. Jupiter obviously is the
Mm.
Hierophant or the Pope, and Juno is the Popess or the High Priestess. They also were replaced by Bacchus and this weird little conqueror man from a famous comedy. I I've been making some TikTok videos about this. So I did post one on that, which I'm happy to share if anybody wants to see the images of that. Um, if you don't take the course. But yeah, it was very, very crazy. But when, the Pope used to be a master, he used to be the one that was like in charge and people would come to him. And then when they associated Aries, they were like, oh, he's the leader, he makes
Hmm.
sense. But then they shifted that to be matched with the Emperor. And then they were like, well, I guess that means he's Taurus. And the Taurus Association ended up kind of showing up in more of like a, well, he's creating stability.
Yeah, I like the
Um,
grounded consistency, but I'm like Taurus
yeah,
is like the Empress. Like Taurus is
I
lounging and
know.
luxuriating and
Right.
creating fertility. It's not like
Yeah,
enforcing the
Venus, right.
rules. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
but I also
yeah.
feel like your relationship to the Hierophant also kind of depends on your relationship to your current life. Like if
Hmm.
you're okay with your boss or your current structure,
Like
then
authority figures and yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
then like
yeah.
it's fine. But if you're not, then it's not fine. It's a very
Hmm.
triggering card.
Okay, well, as we're digging into this, I'm like, we definitely do need to do a full episode on tarot and astrology and like the history of it, and
Yeah.
also going through each of the cards, the major arcana that are associated with it, and explaining a bit more
Yeah.
about how the minor arcana and the decans are connected. So we will
Yeah.
be recording that episode. Depending on when you listen to this episode, check the show notes because once we release that episode, we'll link it here as well. So that will be something that will exist in the near future.
Absolutely.
Cool. Um, do you have any more to say about the history? I feel like it's like the Golden Dawn, especially like coming from an American perspective, like the way
Mhm.
that Rider Waite just heavily influences so much of tarot. And yeah, it
Right.
was just like a few pretty weird people
Right.
who like
Right.
made these decisions. I've had some really, we don't like need to really go here, but just to like make this point, I've had some really
Mhm.
interesting conversations with a good friend who's Jewish about like how it's really concerning to be merging the Kabbalah and this like
Yeah.
hidden like occult like, and Judaism is a closed practice. It's not something that like anyone can
Hmm.
just go take from. And then like these like random British people just
Yeah.
merging it in with the tarot. So that's something if
It
people
is a
do
little weird.
practice, if you do practice Kabbalah in a mystical way and you're not Jewish, I would encourage you to like do your own research on like the ethics of that. Um,
Hmm.
so and yeah, that to me is just like a weird thing with the Golden Dawn and their like association with Kabbalah and yeah, there's definitely some weird stuff there, but I also
Yeah.
find that the writer weight is really useful for learning
Hmm.
tarot and all the images and how that
Yeah,
kind of helps you remember the associations when you see like the pomegranate in the Empress's hand or whatever,
right.
or on her dress. I forget how it is in the
Yeah,
traditional deck, but
it's changed so much of my perspective, honestly, because I've taught with Rider-Waite. I've used Rider-Waite for, I mean, I've had my Rider-Waite deck for probably like 8 or 9 years that I've been like really diving into all of this. But like now that I understand like where so much of it came from, it's made me question a lot of these practices. And
yeah.
especially because like in Italy, anytime you would walk into a magic shop, anytime you would find any place that sold tarot, you would see these ancient decks. They were
Mm.
selling the Visconti deck, they were selling the Solabusca, they were selling like these like ancient, like old versions of the Marseille deck. You would just find modern interpretations of Marseille decks,
Hmm.
and they just like don't use all of the rules, all of the structure that we do today. And that really just it did just come from the
Just
occultists.
like
They were
some
like,
random white
yeah, they like made
crazy
it up.
people. Yeah.
Right. They were like, let's add astrology into this. Let's do this. And
Hmm.
that's been like, because that's how I've taught tarot for years is like, here's the astrology you need to know and understand to like understand the major cards. But then it was like, actually, do you even really need this? Because that's like not where they came from in the first place.
Yeah.
Like,
But I feel
yeah,
like
so it's been interesting.
it's like an onion, right? There's just layers and
Exactly. There's so
layers.
many
And if you
layers.
know the numerology, if you know the elements, if you know
Yeah.
the Rider Waite associations, if you know the astrology, then when you pull a card, you just have so many, like maybe in this moment, the card
Yeah.
needs to be interpreted in a more Marseille way. And maybe in another moment, it needs to be interpreted
Yeah.
more in a Rider Waite way. So I feel like more knowledge can definitely just help empower and like trigger different things in your subconscious. But I also am just like, we don't need to blindly accept things
Right.
without questioning where they came from. And especially with the
Yeah.
Golden Dawn and Rider Waite, it's like, yeah, these aren't necessarily like lineages where we need to 100% just take it. So
Right. And Rider-Waite's 100 years old. It's a pretty
it's
new
like
practice.
very recent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1909. Like,
Well, and now, I mean, I feel like there's so much too that's like so cool with like all of the new more, oh, what are they called when they're not like when they're not tarot decks, but just the other decks that people will
oh, the Oracle
read.
decks.
Yeah, exactly. There's just so many
Yeah.
oracle decks out there, or I
Oh,
have
there's so many options.
like an
Yeah.
herbalism
Yeah.
astrology deck, and there's just a million ways of like working with images is just so
Yeah.
valuable.
It's
um
whatever resonates.
exactly, and whatever like you need to hear in that moment. And tarot is just like it's such a good ally to astrology,
Mm.
and it's also just like such a different practice of just like this divinatory pulling out from the moment, as opposed
Yeah.
to like we both study and practice Hellenistic astrology, which is very lineage based,
Yeah.
very like here are the like mathematical calculations you're doing and
Mm-hmm.
here's the rules, and and then we bring in like a mythic approach to it and an embodied approach as well. So we're not
Yeah.
like strictly just doing zodiacal releasing all day long, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's like tarot does definitely just bring in that kind of subconscious image based
Yeah.
practice that I think is just, yeah, can be really healing and really beautiful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And Lori has pulled like a tarot card a day for ever. Miss Aquarius,
Yeah.
stability, consistency. Like whenever we travel
I know.
together,
I
she's
know.
like, "Here's my card of the day." Like she's like, always. And then like you have like a
Always.
journal where you have been tracking it for years.
Yeah.
Like,
I have. I am very strict with very random certain things in my life, and that is one of them. Um, but I do get asked that question a lot, so that's actually a really good thing to kind of dive into a little bit here. That's a really great way to learn and sit with the cards and like start your practice if that's something you're interested in. I do have a course on the Rider-Waite as well that is currently available.
okay,
Um,
we'll send me a link and we'll link to that in the show notes so that folks can
yeah,
go find that if they want.
absolutely. And you can just message me for it too. I'm pretty casual about it currently. Um, but so yeah, like that's something I recommend. I have a 5-year journal, so every day, every page is a day. So it'll say like January 1st at the top, and then it gives you space for 5 years. And so it's only this much space. It's like 4 lines. Like it's pretty doable. I tend to write really tiny so that I can fit more. But you don't have to. And I write my card of the day in the margins, and then I write whatever happened that day. I write whatever I'm feeling. I write like if the symbolism of the card I pulled that day showed up, I write that so I can keep track of it. If I meet somebody that day that feels like they might be important, I'll make a note that I met that person. And sometimes I look back and it'll be like, I met Sarah today. And I'm like, who's Sarah? And so there are times where like, I'll write something thinking it might be important and I look back and I'm like, I have no idea what I was talking about. But there's other times where like somebody became a really close friend and now I know the card I pulled the day I met them. So that's really cool too. You have the ability to actually look back on your whole life. And this is something I started when I was 25. So I'm on year 8, I believe, 7 or 8,
Yeah.
of my 5-year journal. I'm on a second one now. And it's been very cool. And like when I wrote my book, I used it as inspiration because I like tracked a lot of patterns and certain cards that I was pulling when certain things happened. Um, and yeah, I've noticed so many things just from doing that to such an extreme, and I've just found so many patterns, and I do pull the Hierophant like 3 to 4 times a week for no reason. Um, so there's a lot there, but it's really if you are looking to like start a consistent practice, like something like that is a really great way to get into it, to start it, especially if you can have the consistency of doing that, and then you'll start to notice
Hmm.
crazy patterns.
Yeah. And if you're someone with a lot of fixed energy, like doing it every day can be great.
Yeah,
But
it's good.
also, if you're someone who has a lot of mutable energy and you're just like, I'm inspired some days of the week to pull it, and,
Hmm.
like don't be hard on yourself or beat yourself up if you don't have
Yeah.
like the time or consistency to pull a card every day. Like, what matters is continuing to show up over time. And so,
Hmm.
even if it's just a couple days a week or whatever works with like your schedule and your flow, I feel like that's just a big thing in general, like with all my herbal work, is like we can like New Year's resolution, like I should do all of this and be perfect and fixed with it. And like if that works for you, then like do it. Like Lori's done this for 8 years, and it's just
Yeah.
like an easy little thing she does in the morning. It takes a few minutes and it's like been really, really nourishing for her. But if you're not the type of person to do that, don't like feel like you have to do it every day and then beat yourself up when you forget, because then you're going to end up just quitting it because it won't feel good. So give yourself the
Yeah.
flexibility if you're like more of a
Absolutely.
Pisces Sagittarius person like I
Yeah.
am.
Yes. I just like bought one of those little stands that says card of the day on it, and I like just have it sitting pretty close to my front door. So like I walk past it constantly, and I keep my first deck ever sitting next to it, and I just
Mm,
pull a card from that deck at some point in the morning. And then whatever card flies out, I just put it on that stand. And then all day I can look over. It's like right there.
yeah.
And I can just be like, that was my card of the day today. And
It's just there,
it's
present.
just
And then if
there.
you're learning the deck, then you can be like,
Hmm.
oh, what does the Three of Pentacles mean? And
Exactly.
learn,
Like, where
read
does this
that.
show up for me?
Or you could do a
Yeah.
card of the week as well. Lots of
Yeah.
different ways, but just starting to regularly pull cards and just like one card, you don't have to pull five,
Yeah.
is a great way to learn tarot, because anyone can just,
Yeah.
you know,
Start to form a relationship with certain cards.
totally. Cool. Well,
Great.
I feel like, is that
Yeah,
everything
that's
that
a
we have to
good
say?
that's
Okay.
a good stopping point.
Yeah, awesome.
I could
Well, we'll
talk for three
do.
more hours, but
Yeah, and we will be doing more episodes about tarot as well. So definitely check back in for those. Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.